I'm Charlotte McLeod with the Investing News Network, and here today with me are Gwen Preston of Resource Maven and Peter Kraut, who's launching a silver-focused newsletter alongside Gwen. Thank you both so much for being here online with me today.
Thank you.
Pleasure to be here.
All right, yes, and I'm very excited to talk to you both today about your upcoming plans. This first question, I'm going to open it up to both of you, which is why a silver-focused newsletter right now? What made you came together? How did this all develop? So whoever wants to jump in and answer that one first.
All right. So really, Gwen and I actually both realized that this is an underserved market. There are lots of newsletters out there for all the ranges of resources, metals in particular, gold especially, but silver is more or less ignored, and it certainly deserves investors' attention. It's a very interesting market. It tends to outperform gold pretty much every bull market, and it's certainly something that investors need to consider and include in their portfolios. So we thought, why not put this together and serve a market that really has a void.
All right, and Gwen, anything you would add on that point?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are, like Peter said, there's so many products out there. It's kind of interesting, actually. I assumed that there was a silver focused investment newsletter because there's a lot of people out there who love silver, who are aware of the opportunities that silver presents in a precious metals bull market. But then when you actually dig into it, there isn't the product that we are producing, which is a silver focused newsletter from a team of newsletter writers who are motivated solely by serving their subscribers. So by that, I mean, we don't take money from companies. We just write about what we're buying and selling because of the opportunities that we see. That product doesn't exist. There's certainly experts out there who love silver and who have written about the space for a good period of time. But as it turns out, there is not this silver focused resource newsletter out there. And I mean, the time is right. I'm sure we're going to get into that sort of next, but the time is certainly right to dive right into that silver opportunity.
Perfect. Okay. And yeah, definitely speaking about the time being right for silver, Peter, I wondered if you could take some time to maybe sum up what we've seen from silver during this past very interesting year.
Yeah, that's actually a great way to start because if you look at how silver performed this year, from say the March bottom to the August peak, we were looking at something like a 140% return in silver versus gold's 38% return. So that's nothing to shake a stick at, but 38% versus 140 shows you how silver can clearly easily outperform gold in rallies and in longer term bull markets. So, with that kind of potential, investors can certainly see that it's, like I said earlier, this is definitely something they would want in their portfolio. There are different ways to maybe hedge the risks in terms of, do you want to go for silver itself, like physical or bullion ETFs, or from there stock ETFs, and then large cap producers all the way to junior explorers. But one way or the other, certainly this is a sector that investors should have some exposure to.
All right. And just following up on silver's very exciting performance this year, what would you say, Peter, are the main drivers that we're seeing for silver at the moment?
Well, certainly right now, a lot of the drivers are the same as gold's. We're looking at lots of stimulus, money printing. Certainly being in the second wave of this pandemic is not hurting how safe havens are reacting. And then you go into other things like negative real interest rates and negative rates, zero rates that the Fed's promising up until at least 2023. We have a weakening US dollar. We have a likely new Treasury head who used to be the Federal Reserve head. And I'm talking about the Dove, Janet Yellen. And while she was there, The Fed's balance sheet actually exploded in the first, I think it was, year or so by $500 billion. Now that used to sound like real money. These days it doesn't sound like all that much, but it goes to show her track record, her tendencies. And I think that, when we see her lining up with, I believe Powell was her deputy Fed chair at the time. So now we've got him as Fed chair. We're going to have Yellen as head of Treasury. I think what we're going to see is that the lines between Treasury and Fed are going to start to blur. And, things like MMT, which is modern monetary theory, that's really bandied about a lot lately. I think we're going to start hearing a lot more about that. And it's probably going to start gaining a fair bit of acceptance as well.
Okay, perfect. And a similar question now for Gwen on that note. We spoke, I think, about a month or so ago, and you did a great job of laying out what you think are the main drivers for gold right now. And the top one was, of course, negative real rates. I wanted to ask if you see that being the top driver for silver, considering it also has that industrial side to it.
Yeah, great question. Certainly, the two operate side by side and also differently. And I would say the way I like to characterize it is that gold often does the heavy lifting. So gold, driven by the things that Peter was just describing, these negative real interest rates, which have all kinds of reason these days, COVID being one of them, being a key one. It was sort of the fuel on the fire, because we were already heading in that direction. So gold sort of does the heavy lifting. It sets the stage for investors to diversify how they're trying to get disperse or play their safe money. And safe money has been driven away from bonds because bonds don't provide any yield. It's been driven toward stocks, but stocks are inherently risky, so you need something else. And so then gold becomes the thing. So gold does the heavy lifting in that sense. But gold is not the only precious metal. Silver is the second precious metal. And then there's platinum and palladium, but let's keep the conversation a little bit focused here. So silver is certainly the second precious metal. And it absolutely, for all of those same reasons, comes along once gold has set the stage. And I think we're very much in that situation already. But then gold gets this second wind. And it's so interesting how these things line up. So oftentimes when you're in any of the situations that create negative real interest rates, so that's, economic duress, all kinds of safety concerns, whether those are political, whether they're economic, you're in these situations. Often then, hopefully you move into a situation of economic recovery. And we're really in that setup today where we've had all of these concerns, we've had this huge economic pressure, and then we're moving into a situation of recovery. What's so interesting for silver is that because it is also an industrial metal, it gets the safety buy, but then it gets extra lift from the recovery buy. And this time around, we have sort of even more reason to lean into that or to believe that that will be the case, because in a Biden White House, we're going to have, there's lots of reasons to expect even more emphasis on green energy and those sorts of things. And silver, is needed across the industrial world, but especially in that green category. And so it really is sort of a perfect storm from the real interest rate, safe haven, investment side of the argument, where gold has already done the heavy lifting and silver is really just set up to shine, right through to the recovery side of things, silver being an industrial metal, and all of the, and then the extra political pushes that are likely to only add to that industrial argument. So yeah, it's really a crazily perfect setup. That was a poor choice of words, but it sort of sends the right message.
Okay, perfect. So now we have a pretty good idea of what happened to silver this year, what's behind what its movement. Peter, I wondered if you could give us an idea of what could be coming in 2021. I know that's a difficult thing to ask, and I don't know how much you like to talk about prices, but what do you see in silver's future?
Yeah, so no, I don't mind talking about prices. I know some shy away from it, but Charlotte, let me start by saying that I kind of like to call silver the Cinderella of precious metals. It's sort of left by the wayside, and its ugly sisters are like fiat money and negative real rates, and yet silver is getting ready to go to the ball, and because that I think that silver slipper will fit. So next year, I think we could see silver well into the 30s, probably 35, maybe 37. I don't think that's unrealistic at all. And what that could mean for silver stocks is tremendous. I mean, we've seen it. We've seen it in more recent. We've seen it actually this year. In fact, some of these silver juniors have gone up 10 times, 13 times. I mean, I've seen multiple examples of that. And if we look back on the previous bull, which let's say from 2000, 2001 to 2011, some of the largest silver producers or largest silver companies actually were also up 10 times. I mean, it was just phenomenal. So in terms of next year, I think we're going to see some, anywhere easily from 3 to 5 times in many companies, and probably better in some of the sort of, higher beta kind of names for sure.
All right, maybe talk to me a little bit more about the silver stocks, because one thing that we always seem to hear is that it's a little bit tricky to enter the market just because there are fewer companies available to look at. So, how does an investor approach that?
You're right, absolutely. Silver is a smaller market, and that makes the choice for companies to invest in and investment choices overall. It makes it considerably more limited. But I can say that in the last sort of year or two, I have seen a lot of silver projects and silver companies come to market. So that's actually very exciting. It means more work for me, but that's okay. It means, more good options, I think, for investors. And, I think really that's where the potential is. If people are going to invest in this space, the beauty of it is that you do have, like gold and like other metals and even some of the other precious metals, you have all the whole gamut of choices, everything from the physical to bullion backed ETFs, but then you've got larger producer ETFs, you have more junior ETFs, and then from there you've got the whole range of royalty companies, medium-sized producers, smaller growing newer producers, and even the junior explorers that have a project, have a really good thesis, and need to start proving it out. Of course, that's the higher risk play, and investors know their own tolerance levels. But the point being that the entire market's there in the silver space, and that's what we want to bring to subscribers. That entire gamut, and they can figure out for themselves what sort of risk tolerance they have, and how to allocate the funds across those different risk parameters, and build their own silver portfolio with our guidance.
That sounds great. And I think question for Gwen now, this is something that I think we also talked about when we spoke recently, how each individual investor is very different and the importance of each person building a portfolio that works for them. Maybe if you could speak briefly on, aside from silver stocks, some of the other options that are out there if you do want that exposure to silver.
For sure. And I mean, Peter was getting into that in his last answer, but silver has all of those opportunities. And therefore, investors who are interested in the silver opportunity just need to decide the game that's right for them. And so, Peter was talking about the whole gamut. It absolutely exists, and therefore there's everything from the high risk pre-discovery silver exploration company, which is, starts with a little tiny market cap and a geologic thesis and a capital market setup that you need to understand, all the way through to, the Pan American Silvers of the world, the large silver producers, and then beyond that, the ETFs of producers, or up to, bullion-backed ETFs. And so it's truly, when I invest, I create a series of newsletters that give investors exposure to opportunities from the low risk end of the spectrum all the way through to the high risk end of the spectrum. And I do that for two reasons: because there are investors of all of those types. And so I want to be able to share opportunities with all of them. But I also do it because that's truly how I invest. I think that when we get these precious metals markets, they're short and they're super sweet, and you want to take advantage of them in every way. And the market has its, the market likes to reward all of those kinds of opportunities, all of those kinds of stocks at different times and in different ways and with different risk tolerances. And when I talk about risk tolerances, it's not just what risk you're willing to take on, but how engaged you want to be with your portfolio. If you're going to play high risk explorers, you need to be pretty engaged with those stories and be able to trade them and buy and sell and exit and enter. And if you don't want to take on the risk, that's the same as saying that you don't want to spend as much time engaged with your portfolio. And so you want to play those lower risk opportunities. But at the end of the day, they all work. That's what's so great about a precious metals bull market, is that all of those kinds of opportunities work, just depending on your risk, your time, your engagement, and all of those things. And so Peter and I, one of the things that really worked when we started having a conversation about launching this silver newsletter is that he thinks the same way, that you need to play all of the different kinds of that you can play all of the different kinds of opportunities with success when the market gives you a silver moment. And so that's what Peter is going to be discussing in Silver Stock Investor, is all of those kinds of opportunities and how to decide amongst them, how to combine them, how to take advantage depending on who you are and what you're trying to achieve.
All right. And Peter, a question for you is about silver's volatility. Another thing that we hear all the time about silver is that it's a volatile metal, which I think may scare people away maybe a little bit. So how are you going to be addressing that? What are your thoughts on those movements that we sometimes see in silver?
So yeah, you're right, Charlotte. That is important, and kind of like what Gwen was just saying is that by gaining exposure to the different sort of facets of the silver market, you can minimize that risk. And if someone feels that as an investor they want exposure to this space, but they have a lower risk tolerance, so they can weight their silver allocation to the lower risk areas, and that would be things like the physical or the physical bullion ETFs, the ETFs of silver stocks that will instantly diversify for them. And then, maybe they want to go to silver royalty companies, larger silver producers. And if they want a little bit of spice in that mix, they can, perhaps allocate very small allocations to some junior explorers and get sort of that, that excitement aspect in their portfolio. So I would say that's probably, the best way to approach it. But I did want to say, Charlotte, a lot of people are paying attention, understandably, to things like Bitcoin, and it doesn't seem to scare some people away, the volatility that you see there. So what I would say is anyone who feels like they've missed the boat on Bitcoin, come on over to the silver market, because you can have that same sort of, crazy sort of mania type of action. You do have, especially in the physical side of it, you certainly have the tangibility of it, but silver can go through crazy markets. And again, like we just said, there are ways to hedge, so you don't need to have that crazy volatility in your portfolio or in your allocations. But if that's sort of, in some respects what the investor's looking for, silver's got it. And so, this is definitely a place to be. This is very, very early, I believe, in the silver bull. And so this is a great time to get started, to get invested, to start looking at the space, to do research, read research, especially unbiased research, and look at ways to gain exposure to silver. I believe 6 months, 12 months from now, anyone who hasn't sort of taken that step is going to feel like people who maybe didn't buy Bitcoin in March at $4,000 or $5,000 and are looking at it at like 4 times the price already. So like I say, come on over to silver. There's a good chance you're gonna see very, very similar kinds of returns.
Okay, I do love that Bitcoin comparison because I know we have a lot of people asking questions about that right now. Just a couple of more things before I let us wrap up. I wondered, Peter, if there are any other trends you see in the silver space coming at us. I know we've talked a lot about price, what could happen with price, but aside from price, any trends that you would see?
I think the one trend I would say, and I alluded to it a little earlier, is the idea of a growing number of silver projects and smaller sort of silver explorers and developers that are coming to the public markets, making it possible for investors to gain exposure to that sort of, I guess, higher, more volatile, perhaps, end of the silver market, but nonetheless exciting and interesting because until recently, like I say, it was actually very limited. And it's still relatively limited, but it is growing. And I find that exciting. And that's certainly an interesting and worthwhile trend for investors to explore.
Okay. Final question for both of you, just as we wrap up. I'm asking this to many people as we head into the end of the year. Best advice for investors in 2021 related to silver or otherwise?
2021, coming on the heels of 2020, I think we're all excited for it. 2020 has been an absolutely insane year. I mean, the word unprecedented has been used an unprecedented number of times in 2020. And so I think 2021, with vaccines coming through and those certainly setting the stage for 2021 to be a year of optimism, recovery, growth, all of those things, but all of that happening in a very supportive monetary environment, because that support is still very much needed after the havoc of 2020. It just means that there's going to be a lot of opportunity in 2021. And I'm not just speaking as a gold silver investor here. I'm speaking as an investor. There's going to be a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of money that was pulled to the sidelines in 2020 because it was a crazy, volatile, strange political year. But 2021 certainly is setting up to be a more normal year. It sort of has to be relative to what we just went through. And so there's going to be a lot of opportunity. And I say that because there's going to be great opportunity in the precious metals market because of that, super supportive monetary stance, and yet money looking for a place to invest. It's going to be a good year for anybody who's betting on industrial growth, on economic recovery. And so that works for other metals, that works for all kinds of things. I just think that, therefore, investors need to sit back and think about what they're trying to accomplish and what the various ways are that they can accomplish that. And so I really think that when you sit down and have that conversation with yourself, precious metals really play a role in that. Silver probably stands out in that argument because of the dual monetary / investment and industrial role that it plays. So really just sit down, try and let 2020 wash over you. Look forward to a 2021 that's more about growth, recovery, less volatility, and how you might want to take advantage of that. And I really think that precious metals play a role in that, though base metals will also play a role. Copper is kicking butt these days and therefore also deserves some attention. Uranium has really peaked its head up in the last little while. I think that we're in a growth paradigm in 2021, and that's exciting on all fronts for metals investors. So just figure out what you want to do to take advantage of it, because if you look back at the end of 2021, I think you're going to wish that you had.
All right. And Peter, same question, best advice for investors as we head into 2021?
Yeah, I mean, I would, of course, reiterate what Gwen just said. One sort of important stat that I think may be worth pointing out, and it certainly is related, is that by the end of this year, apparently, we're going to reach something like nearly $280 trillion of debt globally. That's not a trend that's going to reverse anytime soon. It's only going to grow. And you know, if, yes, we do need to look at everything. And I think that everything makes probably some sense to some degree in a portfolio. But if you look at, you know, what's cheap, if you're going to allocate new money to something or you're going to rebalance, you need, obviously, I mean, in my view, you need to look at what's cheap so that you're going to get more for your money. And when it comes, of course, precious metals have a place. And if you look at precious metals from my point of view, and I realize we're talking about a new silver newsletter, but to me, it's undeniable. Silver is very cheap. I mean, gold hit an all-time record in August. Silver is still at half of its all-time record of almost $50. On that basis alone, silver's very cheap. And so, yes, look at everything, but certainly look very closely at silver. It has a place in everyone's portfolio.
And most importantly, Peter, if you could tell us where and when we can find the new newsletter.
So, silverstockinvestor.com. That's going to be the place to go. This is going to be, you can also go to resourcemaven.ca. There will be links to Silver Stock Investor from there. And people can certainly see a lot more about the newsletter, and it's launching for January 1st. You'll get information at either of those websites, and it's coming. It's exciting.
Okay, very exciting. Great way to start the new year. Thank you both for being here today to talk about silver and the upcoming newsletter.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks, Charlotte.
And once again, I'm Charlotte McLeod with the Investing News Network, and this is Gwen Preston and Peter Kraut.